Welcome to Season 2 of Around and Around the OCD Circle podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I have been living with obsessive-compulsive disorder for over 60 years. I am not a therapist or a medical professional. Each week, I will document my struggles and successes while having OCD. I will also speak with ordinary people, just like yourself, from around the globe, who have graciously agreed to share their OCD stories with you. I feel certain you will relate to some or all of their experiences. If at any time you feel like hurting yourself or ending your life, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988 if you are in the United States. It is open 24 hours a day, and you will be connected with the nearest crisis center to receive immediate counseling and local mental health referrals. Now, on to today's episode. Today, I had the great pleasure of speaking with David Albert Cole. 54 years old and living in Canada, David has a fascinating story to tell. Conceived through violence, adopted by an alcoholic mother, and many health issues, caused much anxiety in his life. He was diagnosed in 1999 with OCD during a medical crisis. Let's listen as David tells us about his journey with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Good morning, David. How are
Morning.
you?
I'm good today,
It's
thank you.
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about, your early life, where you grew up, where you are now, so they can kind of get an idea?
Certainly. I'm actually from Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, originally from Sackville, New Brunswick, Canada, which is not far away, about 30-minute drive from here. I'm 54 years old. I started suffering with OCD when I was in my mid-20s. And I went undiagnosed for 10 years due to the fact that at the time I thought I was going loony, literally. I didn't know what to think or do. I didn't want to let anybody know, including my mother, who I was very close to. It didn't get diagnosed until 1999. And at that time, what happened was I confessed to my mother that there was something wrong with me. She accepted it without any issues. And at that point, I had gone on dialysis due to a kidney failure. And due to the fact I was on dialysis, I had to see a psychiatrist to see my mindset before I went on dialysis. So it kind of worked out in a positive light, being that I saw the psychiatrist. We spoke. He diagnosed me with OCD at that time. At the time of meeting, I was at the worst, lowest point probably in my life with the OCD at that point. I didn't know what to do. I was literally crawling out of my skeleton. Didn't want to go outside. Didn't want to go to bathrooms out in public places or anywhere, basically because of my OCD had gotten to that point and so bad. And that's pretty much my early stages, my OCD.
Mm-hmm. Have you had a kidney transplant since then?
I had it in 1999. I've now had it for roughly 25 years, going good still, thankfully.
Uh-huh. So do you think that this health issue was a reason for possibly this OCD showing itself?
A couple different things I'll explain to you. One, I was not naturally born properly. I was born through a rape, and it was on bloodline. My uncle raped basically my mother in a drunken rage, which I didn't find out until I was in my late 20s. So because of that, not only do I have kidney issues, I have hearing issues as well. I have to wear 2 hearing aids in both ears. So also growing up in a home with a mother who adopted me was an alcoholic, I've done a lot of research on this, and that can cause a lot of triggers. So I've looked into that myself, by those being potentially possible. Also, I've read that any little thing can happen. Genetics, lots of different things along the way can actually cause this to come out, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. So do you know anything about your birth family? Do you know if maybe OCD, anyone had it?
I don't know anything about them really. I met my grandmother briefly, and it wasn't a good meeting. Apparently, at the time when they put me up for adoption, it was kind of like almost an embarrassment to the family, I guess. Her being from Holland, a very old lady. She had been in Holland during World War II. My grandfather apparently met her and brought her to Canada, married her as a war bride. So I guess I was kind of like, to them, it wasn't normal. So I guess that was the
Mhm.
reason for the adoption.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's not that it really matters that much, I guess, but we all seem to want to know why it started. Why me? Of all the people,
Yes,
why did it happen to me? And sometimes it brings a little bit of relief when we think we know what started it. I can really relate. I can relate to that, and I'm sure my listeners can too, as well.
certainly, because you try to, you don't want to think you think yourself that you're a good person. Why is this happening to me? And why would I want to even do that? It's kind of like it just pops in your head. It's like you can be driving down the road having the best day of your life, and then all of a sudden something silly will trigger you. And then you're thinking, oh my God, I can't do that. But yet your mind is telling you, yes, you can. Or your mind will tell you, not necessarily you can, but it's a possibility. And then the fear sets in. And then you have that lovely thing called anxiety that comes along. And I call it the circle. What happens is you literally trap yourself in a circle because now you're just going around and around and around trying to figure out, okay, did I do something or did I not do something? And until you stop and think about it, you keep going around in circles. At some point, you want to stop, find the doorway to get out of the circle and not be in that mode anymore because it's hell for anybody.
I love the way you put that because that's actually the name of this podcast, Around and Around the OCD Circle.
Kind of ironic.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I picture mine as well. It's just this big circle
Yes,
and
it's
it
like a
never
big
ends.
circle. It just never ends, and you
Mhm,
just want to think,
mhm.
you just, where's the door? I want to get off this ride now. It's too much.
Okay. So, do you want to talk about some of the rituals, or did you have
Oh, yes.
intrusive thoughts as well? Or, just take me back to.
It, when I my when it started, I was repeating stuff in my head, and it was almost driving me nuts. And then one day it just left. I can't explain it. It just left, and I was fine. Unfortunately, OCD is one of those lovely diseases where sometimes you'll lose one and gain another one. In my case, I started thinking that I was harming people, specifically children, and that has been particularly hard in the last 8 years. As I have basically an uncle to a beautiful little girl who's 8 years old, and I love her with all my heart. But at times, my brain has tried to fool me into thinking that I've touched her, done things I shouldn't have, and that's been hell. Uh, there's times if I get stressed, extremely stressed, that it sets it off. The other one I have is a fear of leaving taps on. I have to double check the other. I will give you a trick to this if anybody wants to know. Use your cell phone. It sounds nuts, but what I'll do before I leave the house, I'll take a picture of the tap to make sure it's not on, and that way it's reassurance. I find that works very well for me.
I've heard other people do that with locks
Yeah,
on doors. Hmm.
even doors you can do that for. You can take a picture of the door. You can take a window. It works really well, believe it or not. And then you kind of like have that peace of mind. I've never, to be honest with you, once I do it, I never have to check it on my phone. I just go back later on the day and delete it out of my phone. It's just knowing that
Right.
I did that, and it, and then I can move on with my day.
Pro tip here, guys. Um, think about that. If there's something that you do that you can take a picture of to ease your mind during the day.
Yeah, it's a very good. I found it. I just thought of it one of the blue. How could I? You get thinking, how can I stop this? Well, and one day I think a eureka moment come over me. I'm thinking, phone. Why not? If it works, it works, right? And it does.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
makes it'll make your people lives a lot better than it would not having that. Because then you leave and then you've had that fear. Did I turn that tap off? Did I lock that door? Did I shut my window? Is the stove on? You can use it pretty much for anything along that nature, and it makes your life a whole lot easier.
Do you remember where you heard that tip? Was that from a counselor or someone?
Actually, I invented it myself, to be honest. One day
Awesome.
I had my phone in my hand and I was playing with a tap. And I'm like, why am I doing this? I thought, I wonder. And I took a picture, and from that, and that's about probably 5 years ago, I thought about that. And I've been doing it ever since.
Hmm. Makes me wonder what things I could take pictures of. A lot of mine is in my head, so that's kind of difficult.
It
And
is difficult, and I understand those thoughts because I've had them. Because it's kind of like you get them. It's like an image in your mind, and it just stays. It doesn't go away.
right.
I will give you another tip. Uh, Meditating is a great thing. It helps a lot. Breathing in very deeply, letting out at the end of the day helps. Focus on something you like. Say if you like to read, say if you like to draw, say if you like any hobby. If you can focus, it gets your mind off it. It's kind of like I call it my little demon. I said if it starts, it's kind of remember the cartoons we used to have the angel on one side and the devil on the other side telling you what to
Mhm.
do. Well, it's kind of
Yeah.
like if you feed it, it's going to continue to grow. If you crush it immediately, it's going to stop. And I know that's difficult for a lot of people, and I'm not going to sit and say that it isn't difficult for myself as well, because it is. But I find that as I've gotten older, uh, I can control it somewhat by basically shifting my pattern of thinking to something like work, drawing, reading, et cetera, et cetera. It does help a lot.
Mhm. Do you have other interests that do you have hobbies and things like that that you
I love racing, auto racing particularly, and I love aviation, mostly military aviation, and I read about history all the time. I'm actually, as I'm done speaking with you, heading to the United States to go see an air show, and also as well, huge Civil War nut in the U.S., so I'm going down there as well with a friend of mine. So those are all my interests pretty much, and plus movies and some
Mhm.
writing sometimes, and that keeps me pretty busy. I find when I'm at work, it blocks my mind a lot. Sometimes, not always, but for the most part, it helps a lot.
So it's not really interfering with your ability to hold a job or anything like that?
It did. When I used to clean, it was I couldn't focus on my cleaning. It was just bad. And the job I'm at now, I work for the city of Moncton, uh, and basically the job I do doesn't have anything that causes me to flare up, so it's perfect for me.
Mhm.
I just
That's awesome.
recycle. What I do is I recycling. So all I'm doing all day is basically taking boxes, breaking them down, and throwing them into a bin. So it's basically for anyone out there that's suffering from OCD that has a hard time with their job. My suggestion is find yourself. I know it's not always possible, but find yourself a job where you feel comfortable that your triggers aren't going to allow you to feel like you can't do the job. And I know that's difficult, but in my case, that's what I had to do. I literally had to leave a job. I told myself I cannot do this because my OCD was so bad. And I said, I got to find something for me that's going to work for me. And unfortunately, and I'm sure you've had this from different people, people will judge you with OCD big time because they don't understand mental illness, which is very difficult. It puts more pressure on you, and then you really start to trigger more as well when that happens.
Yeah, that job would not work for me because
No,
I have to
certainly.
it works for other people. Like when I'm thinking about your job, I'm like, that would not work for me because I cannot have time to think. And
Right.
so the whole time I would be breaking those boxes down, my brain would be going in
Everywhere.
overdrive.
Yeah.
So I have to have a type of job where I have to be, you know, I guess thinking more. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Oh, yeah. It makes sense.
So
To
that
stop your
kind of
thoughts from
blocks the
going.
so that kind
Hmm.
of blocks the thoughts. Whereas you have the opposite and you need more of your mind to be clear and you
Yeah.
need things that don't trigger you.
Certainly.
You don't want need to be around things that trigger you.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. I've never really thought about it that way before.
Well, that's what I want to do this podcast
So
with you because I figured if I can put
yeah.
out there to different people, because I know I've read on the group how many people are suffering. And it's ironic because when I was first diagnosed with this, there's no internet back in that much. What there was, but there wasn't like it is now.
Hmm.
And people like me had to suffer because we thought we were crazy. It's not normal. You go 20 years of your life, everything's fine, and one day you wake up and all these thoughts are coming at you. It's like, what's going on? Am I losing my mind? And I
Right.
mean, the tools you can put out there now to help people, it makes their lives easier. I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to get the word out about this podcast. It's tough.
I
It's
know.
tough to get the word out because a lot of these groups they don't want you to announce that you have a podcast. They consider that spamming.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is word of mouth, and it's been rough. But I'm going to keep on going because I know
Well, I hope you
eventually
do because you're
it
doing a
will
really good
be.
thing.
You know, thank you. So let's see if what some of your Like, can you give me some other ideas? Like you said, the faucets. What else
Uh,
is?
Let me see what else. I used to think one time I was driving over people. I'm sure you've heard of people where they say they hit a pothole and they thought they hit somebody.
Yes.
Uh, Rearview mirrors are good for that because if you look back in your mirror, or you also after a while you start realizing, well, if I hit someone, you're going to do damage to your car. So I used to get in the habit of checking the front of the car, checking, but I stopped after a while because then, well, first you'd hear a thump, and then secondly, your rear mirror would you see something in the back. So I mean, it's little tricks like that that you try and it's almost like you have to retrain your brain, almost rewire it, so to speak, to kind of get around it. I mean, it's. I laughed at a psychiatrist I had seen last year on an up, and she said, "You're curative." I said, "No." I said, "I'm not cured." I said, "I have it in control to a certain degree, but I said I still get flare ups." Yeah. So, I mean, your best bet is to continue to try and just work with yourself, listen to yourself, educate yourself as much as you can. I actually have a book, but I don't have it on me. And what I was reading in the book was really interesting. You actually, what happens with your brain when you're in full OCD mode is what happens is your fight or flight actually stays on and it never goes off. So basically, you're in fight or flight mood constantly when you're in OCD. So that puts your triggers up, that puts your anxiety up. The key is to try and get yourself relaxed enough and out of that fight or flight situation so you get back to normal. And I know it's, again, that's difficult. It's easy to sit here and say, well, you can do this, this, and this all day long. It's a struggle for all of us. I mean, it's kind of like saying, you're cured and you're still doing it. It just doesn't go away that easy, unfortunately.
Yeah. Did this affect your relationships at all? Friendships?
To be honest with you, I have a very tight circle. I None of my friends really know. I keep it very tight between myself. My brother doesn't even know, and I've been.
Wow.
My ex-wife was a great help to me. She knew. I immediately let her know because she saw me acting erratic with different things, so she knew something was up. So I had no kind of like the cats out of the out of the bag. So it was kind
Mhm.
of like I had no choice but to confess to her. So she actually went to the doctors with me. She helped me out very well. Now, my girlfriend I'm with now is amazing. I can go to her. She's basically my safe space. I can tell her anything about it, and she's here for me. So that's my
Mhm.
main support. And the only other person that was my main support was my mom, who sadly has passed away 20 years ago, but she was my main support. So outside of those three individuals and my doctor staff, I pretty much have kept a tight lip on it. I just don't feel like sharing it with anyone because I don't want to be judged for it, I guess, more than anything else. Because I have
Right.
been judged at jobs before for it. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like, well, do people really need to know? And I've kind of, you know, thought at times maybe I should say something, and then part of me says maybe no. And ironically enough, since I'm talking to you, and before the other day we first talked, I've thought about more about letting it out more because I think I might help people because there's other people out there like me. Most people hide it. I don't think a whole lot of people just go around saying, "Hey, I have OCD today. How you doing?" I don't think
No,
it
not
works.
unless a situation comes up and somebody notices and they think, this is not, this is weird or this is affecting something. A lot of people do. Yeah, I know I did for years, hid
I think it's
mine.
because, yeah, I think it's because we're just not comfortable with sharing because we don't want to be judged on it and we don't want to look like we're crazy. We're not
Mhm.
crazy. We just suffer from a mental illness that we can't help. It's not
Right.
something that is in our control to help. I mean, if we could, it's like someone once said, "Well, why can't you just stop?" I said, "Well, if it was that easy, I'd stop tomorrow." And you can't
Yeah.
stop. It's like you can go a long period of time and be fine, and then one day you wake up and boom, it's there, and you don't know
Mhm.
what's going to happen. That's the thing about it.
Do you remember as a child anything that might have been OCD?
As a kid, I don't recall. I really had a good childhood. It wasn't until my 20s. And I think what happened was lifestyle changes maybe caused some of it too. I got married very young. That put more stress on me. Uh, The kidney might have put some stress on me as well, where it was failing, because it does affect the brain. The poison goes to the brain from your kidney when it's failing. I'm not a doctor. I can't say for sure 100%, but I do a lot of research on this because I'm trying to figure out my disease, so to speak. And like a lot of things have come up. I've talked to different people about it, and they kind of tend to agree with certain things could happen to trigger it. And my mother's alcoholism, I think, did a lot of it due to the fact that it's not that my mother didn't love me, because she did, but when she would drink, and it would be like binge drinking, she'd go months drinking and she'd stop. She'd check out emotionally on me. So at that point, she'd be unemotionally available to me. That may have been a trigger to cause it down the road as well. Like, there's no physical way for me to say that it is or isn't, but it's very much a possibility.
I apologize for my dogs.
Oh, no
I will
worries.
I
No
will I
worries.
will edit that out. I think there's somebody walking by. So, okay, so what type of treatment have you been in, and are you in treatment now?
Uh, Ironically enough, I live in Canada with one of the better health systems in the world. The problem is you can't get in to see a psychiatrist for years sometimes. So I've gone through what they call trying to think, a lower form of psychiatrist. It's called a care worker, I think, is how they put it. And you just go in and talk to them and explain the situation. I am medicated. I'm on a thing called fluoxamine, I think is how you pronounce it. I've been on that for about 25 years now.
Hmm.
They up every now and then. I have to have my dose updated if my mind really gets bad. Now, 2 years ago, it got really bad, and I had no choice but to go to the hospital and have to say, "Look, put my medicine up," because I'm having for some strange reason, I don't know if this happens to you, but in the springtime, my triggers come out, and then the rest of the year I'm fine. So I'm guessing something at some point when it first started must have been spring or something.
Mine's fall.
Yeah, mine's the spring. Every year, it never fails to come around. And I've also seen a psychiatrist originally, and I seen a psychiatrist about a year ago, and we went through a whole host of questionnaires of what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, et cetera, et cetera. I'm hoping to see a psychiatrist again here soon. It's just it's very hard here in the city of Moncton right now, where our health system's so taxed with so many people coming into the city, immigrants and everything. You're on a waiting list for a long period of time to see anybody.
Hmm.
So that's
And
why
the
my
and the and but it's free, right?
Oh yeah, we have
Yeah,
a health card issued to us, and then we just go down there and we give that to them, and then we're good to go. We don't pay for it out of our
mm,
pocket here. You can,
right.
however, pay for it out of your pocket. They do have psychiatrists throughout the city, but they're not cheap. And I mean, I'm not making exactly big dollars, so I try to tend to stick with the free system.
So, mental illness needs to be addressed more in Canada.
It's terrible here, very terrible here. Like it's like I told a friend of mine. I said a lot of people are falling through the cracks here in Moncton. We have a homeless problem, something we never had 20 years ago, and a lot of those people are mental illness, not because they want to be on the
Mhm,
streets, they just don't have the capacity to do anything else.
mhm.
It's really bad here now. It's ridiculously bad here. Uh, like for example, I'll just give you a quick example. The waiting room times have gone from 3 hours to 4 hours to now up to 16 hours if you're lucky to see a doctor. It's that
I'm
bad
sorry
here.
to hear that. I'm so sorry to hear that. I've been talking to people all over the world on this podcast, and it's amazing the differences in Greece and
Yeah, it's mind boggling here.
England, Australia, US. I think you're the first Canadian I've spoken to so far. But I do have family in Canada, and I know what you're talking about because I have family members who are on waiting list a mile long
Oh, it's crazy.
to
But I mean,
to have operations and things like that.
the sad part is you might
Mental
like
illness is
it's really bad. And I mean, if you have
yeah.
like a meltdown and there's nothing you can do, well, I'll give you a classic idea. I had a bad 2 years ago. My OCD got to the point where I almost wanted to kill myself. It was that bad.
Mhm.
So I checked into the hospital. I checked into the hospital. Uh, I wanted to see a psychiatrist. They didn't. Basically wasted my time by waiting there for 13 hours. The doctor said they can't keep me overnight. They have no beds. So the worst case scenario was he said, I can give you more medication. So I said, well, do something because I can't deal with this right now. So what they did, they actually upped my medication at the time. But I said to him, I said, no offense, but I said, this is ridiculous. I said, I've been here 13 hours. You're refusing me basically help. And I have to go home and hope to God these pills help. This was not like this 10 years ago. And now it is.
Yeah, and pills don't kick in right away.
No, it takes days, sometimes weeks before that
You
happens. It's
need
kind of
you need to be when you're suicidal, you need to be monitored
yeah, and
24/7.
and that's the problem here.
Heck.
It's kind of like, you could go in there and say, well, I don't feel like I'm going to live much longer, and they're kind of like looking at you like, well, we got no bed, we have nobody here. Uh, Here's your pills, go home. It's kind of pretty bad. Yeah,
Wow, I am so sorry to hear that, David.
well, I appreciate that.
Uh, I'm gonna ask you something. It's kind of a fun question I ask
Sure,
all
go
my
ahead.
guests. How does it make you feel when someone says, "I'm so OCD about that"? For instance, someone will say, I put all my spices in my pantry in alphabetical order. I'm so OCD. Does that
Uh,
offend you? Does that make you laugh? Does it have
it's
any effect on you at all?
kind of chuckle at it, but it's kind of funny because you think it's kind of like, I guess it's, you feel funny about it, but at the same time you're kind of like thinking there's so many versions of OCD out there. There's some people that wash their hands to death. There's some people that want everything in a ducks in a, they got to have everything basically perfectly lined up. There's some people that they can't be touched. There's some people that think they're harming people. There's some people that have there's just a million OCDs out there. And I mean, you kind of think to yourself, you kind of chuck on your head thinking, yeah, I know how you feel. But at the same time, you try and keep the humor going because you don't, it's ironically enough because I use a lot of humor to get through it sometimes because that's the only way you can keep your sanity. Because sometimes you feel like it's like they say, it really is a doubting disease because it can really fool your mind. It's mind boggling how crazy it is that it can fool you into thinking that you potentially could do something or have done something. It's pretty scary sometimes.
Hmm. So, how would you say you're doing now?
This year has not been as bad as some years. I started having a few triggers, but the good news is one time I would go days, weeks worrying about stuff. Now I can throw it out within a day, pretty much, which is really good
Wow,
for me. I'm very proud of
that's
myself,
progress.
very
Awesome.
progressively. Like, I never thought I'd see that because there's times I go weeks and worry myself to the point of biting my nails off, thinking, "Oh my God, did I do something?"
Hmm.
Now it's funny because some I can, and then there's some that will stick. And the ones that are stick are the ones that I try to change my mind pattern and say, okay, well, you know what? Here's my philosophy on it. In your mind you've done this before for 30 years, so nothing's changed in 30 years. So it's just trying to fool you. It's just the same as it did 30 years ago. So you try and get that mindset where, okay, it's lies, it's not true, it's fake. And I'm sure you get that feeling in your gut, kind of like that feeling of fear coming over you when it comes on. It's kind of like, and it's kind of, that's just sets you off a little bit. And I've gotten to the point now. I noticed the other one about a week or two ago, I had that fear, and I said, no, I'm not doing this today. And I just changed my mind immediately, and I got rid of the fears. So it's a work in progress for me. I'm sure anyone will tell you the same thing. It's a constant, even yourself. It's a work in progress that you try your best each day is all you can do and do what you do. I mean, everybody has their rituals. I'm sure you have yours as well. And all you can do is your best.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. I always ask at the end if you have any words of wisdom for the listeners that you like to leave them with, something for hope, something that you've learned, um,
Certainly. Uh,
anything.
for anyone out there today, uh, hang on. It's not going to define who you are ever. You're a good person. Don't let this tell you that you're not. That's one thing for sure. You are a good person. Do not allow yourself to get to the point where you want to kill yourself because it's not worth it. It's a disease. It's a mental illness. It doesn't own you. You own it eventually. And research. There's a tons of stuff on YouTube you can look on now. There's great books out there. I wish I could recommend some. I can't off my head right now. But if you want to check your local Amazon or any bookstore that you're at, you can find a lot of books on OCD now. I would suggest reading them. I would suggest taking notes. Note taking is especially good because that gives you a thing to kind of go back on and say, okay, well, this helped me here today, or this, it may not help you the next time, but it may help you that time. And like I said, there's always hope. And if you feel really down and you feel really hurt inside and you can't go anywhere with it, find someone that has OCD as well, because they understand and they're likely to say to you, hey, I know what you're going through, because that's what a support group is good for as well. That's pretty much what I would say. And I said, never lose hope, because tomorrow's always a different day.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, David, and you're always welcome to come back on the show anytime.
Love to, anytime.
Wasn't that a fascinating story? I hope you related to some of David's experiences. I'm grateful that he met with me and shared all he has been through, and I'm thrilled with his positive outlook on the future. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on this podcast, please contact me at one of my social media links below. And don't forget that this podcast has a Facebook group. We're a very small group, but we are growing. We can offer you support and understanding. My blog is also linked below. I started it many years ago. You can read about what a dark place I was in at the time. Remember that while OCD cannot be cured, it can be managed, and I am living proof of that. I hope that you all have a fantastic week. Don't forget to check out Thursday's Midweek Motivation, and please join me next Monday morning for a new episode of Around and Around the OCD Circle.